The military ceremony hall at Fort Mason buzzed with quiet conversation. Officers in dress uniforms filled the rows of folding chairs, their brass buttons catching the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. At the back of the room, Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood alone near the coffee station, her simple dress uniform bearing no flashy decorations despite the 3 rows of ribbons on her chest. She was tired, bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from 28 years of service, most of it spent in places she could never talk about. At 52, Sarah had earned every gray hair on her head and every line around her eyes. But today wasn't about her. Today was supposed to be about honoring fallen soldiers, about remembering those who never made it home. Sarah had flown in from Washington that morning, squeezing this ceremony into a schedule that would have broken most people half her age. She had 3 meetings tomorrow, a briefing on Thursday, and a stack of classified reports waiting on her desk. But when the invitation came to speak at this memorial service, she couldn't refuse. She owed it to the men and women who served under her command. A group of young Navy SEALs stood near the entrance, their youth and confidence radiating like heat. They were the new generation, fresh from dangerous missions, carrying themselves with the swagger that came from surviving what most people couldn't imagine. Sarah recognized that confidence. She had worn it herself, once upon a time. One of them caught her eye. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of perfect posture that came from years of discipline. His uniform was immaculate, his chin held high. He nudged his companion and nodded in Sarah's direction. "Check it out," he said, his voice carrying farther than he probably intended. "They let anyone wear a uniform these days." His friends chuckled. Sarah kept her expression neutral, stirring her coffee slowly. She had heard worse, much worse. The SEAL took a step toward her, emboldened by his audience. His name tag read Briggs. He couldn't have been more than 30, maybe 32, young enough to think he knew everything, old enough to know better. "Excuse me, ma'am," Briggs said, the word ma'am dripping with barely concealed mockery. "Just curious, what's your rank?" Sarah looked up from her coffee, meeting his eyes with the calm, steady gaze that had stared down warlords and politicians alike. She saw what he saw when he looked at her. A middle-aged woman with gray hair. Someone who probably pushed papers in an office somewhere. Someone who didn't belong in a room full of real warriors. "Colonel," she said simply, her voice quiet but clear. Briggs smirked, glancing back at his friends. "Colonel," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's impressive. What do you do, Colonel? Personnel administration?" He said the words like they were insults. One of his companions, a shorter man with nervous eyes, tugged at Briggs's sleeve. "Come on, man, leave it alone." But Briggs shook him off. He was on a roll now, playing to his audience. "I'm just saying it's a memorial service for combat veterans, real warriors, people who actually put their lives on the line. No offense, ma'am, but maybe you'd be more comfortable at a different event." The room had gone quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, watching, waiting to see how she would respond. Some of the older officers in the room had gone very still, their faces unreadable. Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee. She had been in firefights that were less tense than this moment. She had commanded soldiers in situations where one wrong word meant death. This young SEAL had no idea who he was talking to, and that was fine. She didn't need him to know. "No offense taken," Sarah said evenly. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Thank you for your concern." Briggs blinked, apparently surprised she hadn't snapped back. His smirk widened. "Right. Well, enjoy the ceremony. Try to stay awake during the boring parts." He turned to walk away, victorious in his own mind. His friends followed, though a couple of them looked back at Sarah with something that might have been shame in their eyes. Sarah stood alone again, her coffee cooling in her hand. Her jaw was tight, but her face remained calm. She had learned a long time ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Some disrespect wasn't worth acknowledging. She had bigger things to worry about than one arrogant young man who didn't know any better. But it stung. After everything she had done, after all the years of service, after all the sacrifices, it still stung to be dismissed so casually. An older man approached her. He was in his 70s, wearing a uniform from decades past, his chest heavy with medals from wars most people only read about in history books. His name tag identified him as Retired General Robert Hayes. "You handled that with grace, Colonel," he said quietly. "More grace than he deserved." Sarah managed a small smile. "It's fine, sir, really." "No," General Hayes said, his voice firm despite his age. "It's not fine, but it will be." He patted her shoulder gently, then moved toward his seat. Sarah watched him go, wondering what he meant by that last comment. Around her, the room slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. The moment passed, but she noticed things had changed. Several of the senior officers were watching Briggs now, their expressions hard. A few were whispering to each other, their faces serious. The ceremony coordinator, a nervous captain with clipboard in hand, approached the front of the room. "Please take your seats, everyone. We'll be starting in 5 minutes." Sarah found a seat near the back, as she always did. She preferred to stay out of the spotlight, to observe rather than be observed. It was a habit born from years of intelligence work, from missions where being noticed meant being dead. As people settled into their chairs, Sarah allowed herself to remember. She thought about the soldiers she had lost over the years. The young men and women who trusted her, followed her, and never made it home. She thought about the classified operations that would never make the news, the battles fought in the shadows, the victories no one would ever celebrate. She thought about Afghanistan, about the night everything changed, about the decision she made that saved 37 lives but cost her everything else, about the scars she carried, the ones visible and the ones hidden deep inside. Briggs and his friends sat 3 rows ahead of her, their backs straight, their heads held high. They whispered to each other occasionally, probably still laughing about the gray-haired colonel who thought she belonged at a warrior's memorial. The lights dimmed. The ceremony coordinator stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. We gather to honor those who gave everything in service to our nation." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. This was why she came, not for recognition, not for respect, but to remember, to honor, to make sure the fallen were never forgotten. "Before we begin," the coordinator continued, "I want to acknowledge some special guests in attendance today. We are honored to have several distinguished officers with us." Sarah opened her eyes, preparing for the usual list of names, the usual parade of ranks and titles. "We have 4 generals with us today," the coordinator said, and something in his voice made Sarah sit up straighter. "These 4 officers have served our nation with extraordinary distinction. Together, they represent over 130 years of combined service." 4 men stood up from the front row, turning to face the audience. Sarah recognized them immediately. General Martin Walsh, General David Chen, General Robert Hayes, and General Thomas Blackwood. 3 of them were retired, legends in the military community. General Blackwood was still active, serving as the Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command. "These generals," the coordinator continued, his voice growing stronger, "have come here today for a very specific purpose. They have asked for the opportunity to address this gathering before we begin the formal ceremony." The room was dead silent now. This wasn't on the program. This wasn't planned. Sarah felt a flutter of unease in her stomach. Something was happening, something she didn't understand. General Blackwood stepped forward. He was an imposing man, 6 feet 4 inches of solid authority, with silver hair and eyes that had seen everything warfare had to offer. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room without effort. "I'm going to tell you a story," he said, "and I need every person in this room to listen carefully, especially our young warriors in the 3rd row." Sarah saw Briggs stiffen in his seat. His friends shifted uncomfortably. General Blackwood's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Sarah before moving on. "6 years ago, I received a call in the middle of the night. There was a situation in Afghanistan. A classified operation had gone wrong. 37 American soldiers were trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces. They had maybe 6 hours before they would be overrun and killed. The room was so quiet Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. We had no good options, the general continued. The location was remote. The enemy had superior numbers and position. Every tactical analysis said the same thing. We could maybe get a few people out, but 37? Impossible. We were looking at the worst single-day loss of American forces in over a decade. He paused, letting his words sink in. And then one single officer, stepped forward with a plan. A plan so dangerous, so audacious, that everyone in that command center thought she was insane. Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense. No, he wasn't going to do this. This wasn't supposed to be public. This operation was classified. It would always be classified. But General Blackwood kept talking. This officer volunteered to lead a rescue mission herself. She had intelligence training, language skills, and knowledge of the terrain. Her plan involved going in with a small team, using deception and local contacts to create a corridor for extraction. It was a 1-in-a-million shot, and if it failed, we would lose not just the 37 trapped soldiers, but everyone on the rescue mission as well. Briggs had turned pale. His smirk was gone. "I authorized the mission," General Blackwood said, and that officer went in. She spent 72 hours behind enemy lines with almost no sleep, negotiating with local tribal leaders, coordinating with air support, and personally leading soldiers through hostile territory under constant fire. The general's voice grew harder, sharper. She was shot twice. She kept moving. She carried a wounded soldier on her back for 3 miles. When her radio died, she used signal flares to guide in the extraction helicopters. And when enemy forces tried to overrun the landing zone, she held them off with a rifle and sheer determination until every single soldier was on those helicopters. Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She didn't want to remember that night. The pain, the fear, the terrible certainty that she was going to die in that desert. 37 soldiers came home, General Blackwood said. Every single one, because of one officer who refused to accept that they were lost. An officer who put her own life on the line without hesitation. An officer who has spent nearly 3 decades serving this nation in ways most people will never know about and can never be publicly recognized. He turned then, his eyes finding Sarah in the back of the room. "Colonel Sarah Mitchell," he said, "would you please stand?" Sarah's hands gripped the sides of her chair. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't want to stand. She didn't want this attention. The mission was classified. Her service was supposed to stay in the shadows where it belonged. That was the deal. That was always the deal. But General Blackwood was waiting, and 3 other generals had turned to look at her as well. The entire room had swiveled in their seats, searching for the woman he had just described. Slowly, reluctantly, Sarah stood. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she locked her knees and kept her face composed. Years of training took over. When in doubt, stand straight and look forward. The room erupted in whispers. Officers who had been sitting near her stared with wide eyes, suddenly seeing her in a completely different light. The gray-haired woman they had barely noticed was the hero from a story they never knew existed. Briggs was frozen in his seat, his face drained of all color. His friends wouldn't look at him. They stared straight ahead, mortified. General Blackwood wasn't finished. Colonel Mitchell received the Distinguished Service Cross for that operation. The ceremony was classified. Only a handful of people in this room know about it. But I think it's time more people understood what real service looks like. General Martin Walsh stood up next. He was older than Blackwood, retired for nearly 8 years, but his voice still carried the weight of command. "I worked with Sarah Mitchell for 12 years in the intelligence community. She speaks 7 languages fluently. She has advised presidents. She has planned operations that prevented terrorist attacks on American soil, attacks that would have killed hundreds, maybe thousands of people." He paused, his eyes hard as steel. And she did it all without seeking credit, without demanding recognition. Because she understood something that some people in this room need to learn. Service isn't about glory, it's about sacrifice. General David Chen was next. He was the quietest of the 4, a man who had spent most of his career in special operations. I have commanded some of the finest warriors this nation has ever produced: Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Raiders. And I can tell you without hesitation that Colonel Sarah Mitchell has more courage, more tactical brilliance, and more dedication to her soldiers than 99% of the operators I've known. His words hit like hammer blows. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. She doesn't wear her achievements like decorations, General Chen continued. She doesn't need to tell you how many missions she's completed or how many lives she's saved. But I will, because someone needs to say it out loud. He began listing operations, using only their code names since the details were still classified. Operation Silver Dawn, Operation Nightfall, Operation Crimson Shield, Operation Silent Thunder. With each name, Sarah felt herself reliving moments she had tried to forget, moments of terror and triumph, moments when everything hung in the balance. In each of these operations, General Chen said, Colonel Mitchell was essential, not support, not administration, essential. She planned them, she executed them, she brought her people home. General Robert Hayes was the last to speak. He was the oldest of the four, in his late 70s, with a chest full of medals from Vietnam and decades of service after. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the back of his chair, but his voice was strong. I knew Sarah when she was just a young lieutenant, he said, a slight smile on his weathered face. Smart as a whip, tough as nails, but more than that, she had something special. She cared about her soldiers, really cared, not in the abstract way some officers do, but personally. She learned their names, their stories, their families. He looked directly at Briggs now, and his smile faded. When you wear that uniform, you represent something bigger than yourself. You represent every person who came before you and every person who will come after. And when you disrespect a fellow officer, especially one who has sacrificed more than you can imagine, you dishonor not just them but yourself. Briggs's face had gone from pale to red. He looked like he wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. Colonel Mitchell, General Hayes continued, turning back to Sarah, would never have asked us to do this. In fact, if she had known we were planning this, she would have begged us not to. She doesn't want recognition. She never has. But sometimes the quiet heroes need to be acknowledged, even if only among their brothers and sisters in arms. The four generals stood together now, facing Sarah, and then, in perfect unison, they saluted her. A slow, deliberate salute, a salute of respect, a salute of recognition from warriors who knew exactly what her service meant. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face now, and she didn't try to hide them. She returned the salute, her hand trembling slightly. Around the room, other officers were standing, adding their salutes to the generals. One by one, row by row, until nearly everyone in the room was on their feet, hands raised in tribute. Briggs stood too, finally. His salute was shaky, his eyes glistening. The arrogance was gone, replaced by shame and something that might have been understanding. When the salutes ended, General Blackwood spoke again. I wanted to tell this story today for a reason. We're here to honor fallen soldiers, men and women who gave their lives in service. But we also need to honor the living. The ones who carry the weight of command, who make the impossible decisions, who bear the scars we can't see. He gestured for Sarah to come forward. She hesitated, but his expression left no room for refusal. On legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Sarah walked down the aisle toward the front of the room. Every eye followed her. Every face showed a mixture of respect and awe. When she reached the front, General Blackwood put a hand on her shoulder. I have one more thing to share. Colonel Mitchell submitted her retirement papers 6 weeks ago. She was planning to leave the service quietly, without fanfare, after 28 years of dedication. Sarah closed her eyes. She hadn't wanted anyone to know yet. She had planned to slip away, to fade into civilian life without making a fuss. But apparently, nothing was going according to plan today. I rejected those papers, General Blackwood said, and Sarah's eyes snapped open. I rejected them because the Army isn't finished with Colonel Mitchell, and more importantly, Colonel Mitchell isn't finished with the Army. He turned to face her directly. Sarah, I've been authorized by the Secretary of the Army to offer you a promotion. We want you to take command of the intelligence support activity. It's a position that requires someone with your exact combination of skills, experience, and integrity. Someone who can lead the next generation of intelligence officers. Someone who can teach them what real service means. Sarah's mind reeled. The intelligence support activity. It was one of the most important and most secretive units in the entire military. A position of immense responsibility and influence. I know you're tired, General Blackwood said softly, so only she could hear. I know you want to rest, but we need you. Not for you to keep fighting in the field. We need you to train the ones who will. We need your wisdom, your experience, your heart. Sarah looked at the 4 generals standing before her. She looked at the room full of officers, many of them young, many of them watching her with new understanding in their eyes. She thought about the fallen soldiers this ceremony was meant to honor. She thought about the soldiers still serving, still fighting, still sacrificing. And she thought about Briggs, the young SEAL who had dismissed her so casually. He was still standing, still looking shaken, still learning a lesson he would never forget. He represented all the young warriors who didn't understand yet, who thought service was about glory and valor and perfect uniforms. Someone needed to teach them. Someone needed to show them what real leadership looked like. I accept, Sarah heard herself say. The words surprised her even as they left her mouth. I accept the position. General Blackwood smiled, a genuine expression of relief and satisfaction. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside were the stars of a brigadier general. Then it's my privilege, he said, his voice carrying to the entire room, to promote you to the rank of brigadier general, effective immediately. The room exploded in applause. Officers stood again, clapping and cheering. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the noise, by the emotion, by the weight of what had just happened. She had come to this ceremony expecting to be a quiet observer, and instead, her entire life had changed. General Blackwood pinned the stars on her shoulders himself, taking his time, making sure they were perfect. When he finished, he stepped back and saluted her again. The other 3 generals did the same. Congratulations, General Mitchell, General Blackwood said. You've earned this 1,000 times over. Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight. She just nodded, accepting their salutes, accepting the applause, accepting a future she hadn't planned for. The ceremony coordinator approached nervously. General Mitchell, he said, stumbling slightly over her new rank, we would be honored if you would say a few words. Sarah took a deep breath. Public speaking had never been her strength. Give her a hostile negotiation with a warlord or a tactical situation with a dozen variables, and she was comfortable. But standing in front of friendly faces, expected to be inspiring, that terrified her. But she moved to the podium anyway. The applause died down. The room settled. Everyone waited. I don't know what to say, Sarah began, her voice rough with emotion. I came here today to honor the fallen, to remember the soldiers who didn't make it home, and somehow you've turned this into something about me. That doesn't feel right. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The soldiers we lost, they're the real heroes. They gave everything. I just did my job. I did what any officer should do. I tried to bring people home. Her eyes found Briggs in the crowd. He was watching her intently, tears on his cheeks now. When I was young, I thought being a soldier was about being tough, about being fearless, about proving I was as good as anyone else. It took me years to learn that wasn't it at all. She gripped the edges of the podium. Being a soldier is about service. It's about putting others first. It's about making the hard choices when there are no good options. And it's about respect. Respecting your fellow soldiers, regardless of their rank or their position, or whether they fit your idea of what a warrior looks like. The room was completely still. Sarah's words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that touched everyone. We're all part of something bigger than ourselves, she continued. Every person in this uniform, from the newest private to the most senior general, we're all connected. We depend on each other, we serve each other, and we honor each other. She looked at the 4 generals who had changed her day, changed her life. I'm grateful for the recognition, more grateful than I can express. But the real reward was always bringing soldiers home, knowing that families got to see their loved ones again. That was enough. That was always enough. Sarah took a breath. So let's do what we came here to do. Let's honor the fallen. Let's remember their names and their sacrifice. And let's promise them that we'll take care of the living, that we'll serve with honor and integrity and respect, that will be worthy of the uniform we wear. She stepped back from the podium, and the room erupted again. But this time, Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about the soldiers who weren't here, the ones whose names would be read aloud in a few minutes, the ones who had trusted her and paid the ultimate price. As she returned to her seat, now in the front row at the general's insistence, Sarah felt Briggs watching her. She met his eyes briefly. He mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Sarah nodded slightly. It was enough. He had learned. That was what mattered. The ceremony continued. Names were read. Stories were shared. Tears were shed. And through it all, Sarah sat with the 4 generals who had defended her, honored her, and changed her life forever. She was tired. She was overwhelmed. But she was also ready. Ready for the next chapter. Ready to serve in a new way. Ready to teach the next generation what these 4 men had taught her over the years. Service wasn't about glory. It was about sacrifice. It was about showing up, doing the work, and putting others first. Always. 3 months later, Sarah sat in her new office at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The nameplate on her desk read, Brigadier General Sarah Mitchell, in crisp letters. She still wasn't used to it. Every time someone called her General, a part of her wanted to look around for whoever they were really talking to. The Intelligence Support Activity Headquarters was housed in a nondescript building that could have been any military office complex. That was intentional. The unit's work required anonymity. The soldiers who served here were among the most highly trained in the world, but nobody outside certain circles would ever know their names or their accomplishments. Sarah's assistant, a sharp young captain named Rebecca Torres, knocked on the door. "General, your 10 o'clock is here. Lieutenant Briggs from Naval Special Warfare." Sarah looked up from the intelligence briefing she had been reviewing. "Briggs, Jason Briggs." "Yes, ma'am. He requested a meeting with you specifically." Sarah leaned back in her chair, surprised. She hadn't spoken to Briggs since the ceremony 3 months ago. She had seen the look of shame on his face, had accepted his silent apology, and assumed that was the end of it. What could he possibly want now? "Send him in," she said. A moment later, Briggs entered her office. He looked different than he had at the ceremony. Older somehow, though only a few months had passed. His perfect posture was still there, but the arrogance was gone. He moved with careful respect, waiting to be invited to sit. "Lieutenant Briggs," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral. "Please have a seat. What can I do for you?" Briggs sat on the edge of the chair, his cover in his hands. "General Mitchell, thank you for seeing me. I know you're busy, and I know I don't deserve your time. But I needed to speak with you in person." Sarah waited, studying him. He was nervous. Good. Nervous meant he had thought about this, had prepared. Nervous meant he was taking this seriously. "I came to apologize," Briggs said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "What I said to you at the ceremony, the way I treated you, it was inexcusable. I was arrogant and disrespectful, and I've been carrying the shame of that moment ever since." He met her eyes, and Sarah saw genuine remorse there. "I thought I knew what a warrior looked like. I thought service was about physical strength and combat operations. I was wrong, completely wrong, and I want you to know that what happened that day changed me." Sarah nodded slowly. "I appreciate you coming here to tell me that, Lieutenant. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." "I need to tell you something else," Briggs continued. "After the ceremony, I couldn't stop thinking about what the generals said, about your service, about the missions you led, so I started asking questions, quietly to people who had the clearances to know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I learned about Afghanistan, about the extraction mission. I learned that one of the soldiers you carried out that night was my friend from Bud S training, Mike Castillo. We went through selection together. He saved my life during a training accident, and you saved his." Sarah felt her breath catch. She remembered Castillo. Young, strong, determined. He had been shot in the leg during the extraction, the bone shattered. She had carried him 3 miles because there was no other choice. She didn't know he had a connection to Briggs. "Mike told me about you," Briggs said, his voice thick with emotion. "He said you refused to leave anyone behind. That when the situation got worse and the enemy closed in, you put yourself between them and the wounded. That you held a rifle with one hand and kept pressure on his bleeding leg with the other." Tears were running down Briggs's face now, and he didn't bother to hide them. "He's alive because of you. He has a wife now, 2 kids, a life, all because you refused to give up on him." Sarah felt her own eyes burning. She remembered that night so clearly. The fear, the pain, the absolute certainty that she wasn't going to make it, but also the determination. The voice in her head that kept repeating, "Not on my watch. Nobody dies on my watch." "Mike wanted to come here with me," Briggs said, "but he's deployed right now. He asked me to tell you thank you, to tell you that he thinks about what you did every single day, that he's trying to be worthy of the second chance you gave him." "Tell him he doesn't owe me anything," Sarah said quietly. "Tell him to live well, to be there for his family. That's all the thanks I need." Briggs nodded, wiping his face. "There's one more thing. I've been thinking about my career, about what kind of officer I want to be, and I realized I need to learn from someone who understands what real leadership means." He straightened in his chair. "General Mitchell, I'm requesting a transfer to the Intelligence Support Activity. I want to serve under your command. I want to learn from you." Sarah was stunned. The ISA was extremely selective. SEALs were certainly qualified, but transferring meant leaving the teams, leaving the brotherhood that defined his identity. "That's a significant decision," Sarah said carefully. "The SEALs are elite. You have a promising career there. Why would you give that up?" "Because I want to be more than just a good operator," Briggs said. "I want to be a good leader, a good officer. The kind who thinks beyond the mission, who sees the bigger picture. You do that. The generals at the ceremony, they talked about how you plan operations, how you think 3 steps ahead, how you care about the strategic implications. I need to learn that." He leaned forward. "I'm good at kicking down doors, General. I'm good at the tactical side. But there's a whole world of military operations I know nothing about. Intelligence gathering, analysis, working with foreign assets, long-term strategic planning. I want to learn it, and I want to learn from the best." Sarah considered him carefully. This was either a genuine desire to grow or an attempt to make up for his earlier behavior. She needed to know which. "Why now?" she asked. "Why this sudden interest in intelligence work?" Briggs didn't hesitate. "Because I realized my arrogance almost made me miss the most important lesson of my career. I spent years thinking I was special because I made it through Bud S, because I completed difficult missions, because I survived situations that would break most people." He shook his head. "But that day at the ceremony, I learned that the toughest battles aren't always the ones with bullets. They're the ones where you have to make impossible choices, where you have to lead people through situations where there are no good options, where you have to put yourself last and your soldiers first, every single time." Sarah saw the sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't about redemption or making amends. This was about genuine growth, genuine desire to be better. "The transfer process isn't simple," Sarah said. "You'd have to go through additional screening, psychological evaluations, interviews with multiple senior officers. The ISA doesn't accept everyone who applies, even from elite units." "I understand," Briggs said. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Sarah made a decision. "I'll support your transfer request, but I need you to understand something. If you come to the ISA, you won't be treated like a hero because you're a SEAL. You'll start at the bottom. You'll have to prove yourself all over again, and the work is different. It's less about physical courage and more about mental discipline, patience, the ability to live in the gray areas." "I understand," Briggs repeated. "And if I ever see that arrogance again," Sarah continued, her voice hardening, "if I ever see you disrespect another soldier based on your assumptions about what makes someone worthy, you're done. Not just with the ISA. I'll make sure you don't serve anywhere. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, General." Briggs stood and came to attention. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you down." After he left, Sarah sat in silence for a long moment. Rebecca poked her head in. "Everything okay, General?" "Yeah," Sarah said, a slight smile on her face. "Everything's fine. Actually, better than fine." Over the next weeks, Sarah threw herself into her new role. She reviewed personnel files, studied operational plans, met with her team leaders. The ISA had approximately 300 personnel, all of them highly skilled, all of them carrying security clearances that made them some of the most trusted people in the military. Her job was to coordinate their activities, to make sure intelligence was flowing to the people who needed it, to plan operations that supported broader strategic goals. It was demanding work, but Sarah found she loved it. For the first time in years, she wasn't in the field. She wasn't dodging bullets or negotiating with hostile forces. She was using her mind, her experience, her strategic thinking. But she also made time for something else. Something the Army hadn't asked her to do, but that she felt was necessary. She started a mentorship program for female officers in combat and intelligence roles. The program met twice a month. Junior officers would come to talk about their experiences, their challenges, their aspirations. Sarah would listen, share her own stories, offer advice. She brought in other senior officers, both male and female, to speak about leadership and service. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 months, she had a waiting list of officers who wanted to participate. Women who had felt isolated, overlooked, or underestimated. Women who needed to hear that they belonged, that their service mattered, that someone understood their struggles. During one session, a young Army captain named Jennifer Owens shared a story that hit close to home. "I was in a briefing last week," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "I've been working on an intelligence analysis for months, spent hundreds of hours on it. When I presented my findings, one of the male officers literally asked if I had checked my sources, like I was some kind of amateur who didn't know how to do my job." Other women in the room nodded. They had similar stories, the casual dismissals, the assumptions about competence, the extra scrutiny that their male counterparts didn't face. "What did you do?" Sarah asked. "I kept my cool," Captain Owens said. "I walked him through every source, every piece of data, every conclusion. By the end, he had to admit my analysis was solid. But it made me so angry. Why do I have to prove myself twice as much just to be taken seriously?" Sarah leaned forward. "You don't, not to me, not to anyone who matters. But I'm going to be honest with you. Some people will always underestimate you. Some people will always question your competence because you don't fit their image of what a soldier should be." She looked around the room at the young faces watching her. "You can let that break you, or you can let it make you stronger. You can waste energy being angry, or you can channel that energy into being so good at your job that nobody can question you. Not because you have to prove yourself to them, but because you owe it to yourself and to the soldiers depending on you." "But it's not fair," another officer said. "We shouldn't have to work twice as hard." "You're right," Sarah said. "It's not fair, but life isn't fair, service isn't fair, war definitely isn't fair. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She stood up and walked to the front of the room. "When I was a young lieutenant, I had a commander who told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Mitchell, the uniform doesn't care about your gender. The enemy doesn't care about your gender. The only person who cares is you. So stop worrying about what other people think and focus on being the best officer you can be.'" Sarah smiled at the memory. "It made me furious at the time. I thought he was dismissing my concerns. But later, I realized he was right. I was spending so much energy being angry about how people treated me that I wasn't spending enough energy on my actual job." "So you're saying we should just accept the disrespect?" Captain Owens asked. "No," Sarah said firmly. "I'm saying don't let it define you. Don't let someone else's ignorance become your problem. Do your job with excellence. Support your fellow officers, male and female. Build the military you want to see. And when you have the power to make changes, make them." She thought about Briggs, about how one moment of public accountability had changed his entire perspective. Sometimes people need to be educated. Sometimes they need to be challenged, and sometimes they just need to see the truth, be the truth, be the example that makes them question their assumptions. The session continued for another hour. Stories were shared, advice was given, connections were made. When it ended, Sarah felt energized despite the late hour. This was important work, maybe as important as any mission she had ever led. As the room emptied, Captain Owens approached her. "General Mitchell, thank you for your honesty, for starting this program. It means more than you know." "Thank you for sharing your story," Sarah said, "and for having the courage to keep serving despite the challenges." After everyone left, Sarah returned to her office. There was always more work to do, always more reports to read, more decisions to make, more problems to solve. But for the first time in her career, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her phone rang. It was General Blackwood. "Sarah, how's command treating you?" he asked. "It's good, sir. Challenging but good." "I heard about your mentorship program. That's excellent initiative." "Thank you, sir. It seemed necessary." There was a pause. "Sarah, I'm calling because I need your input on something. We're planning a major operation in the Middle East. Complex situation. Multiple moving parts. I want you on the planning team." Sarah felt a familiar thrill. This was what she lived for. The challenge, the puzzle, the opportunity to make a real difference. "I'm honored, sir. When do we start?" "Tomorrow. I'll send you the details tonight. Classified briefing at 0800. After he hung up, Sarah looked around her office. The photos on her walls. The commendations. The reminders of a career spent in service to something bigger than herself. She thought about that young lieutenant she used to be, desperate to prove herself, desperate to be respected. That lieutenant would have been amazed to see where she ended up. Not because of the rank or the position, but because of the peace. The understanding that respect wasn't something you demanded or fought for. It was something you earned through consistent service, through competence, through caring about your mission and your people more than your ego. Sarah opened her laptop and began reading the classified file that had just arrived. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new opportunities to serve, and she was ready. The classified briefing room in the Pentagon was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Sarah sat at a large conference table with 11 other senior officers, each representing different branches and specialties. Digital displays covered the walls, showing maps, intelligence reports, and satellite imagery. General Blackwood stood at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. What I'm about to share is classified at the highest levels. Nothing discussed in this room leaves this room." He clicked a remote, and a map of Syria appeared on the main screen. 3 weeks ago, one of our intelligence sources inside ISIS made contact. He has critical information about planned attacks on U.S. interests in Europe, multiple targets, potentially thousands of casualties. The room was completely silent. Everyone understood the implications. "The problem," General Blackwood continued, "is that our source can't transmit the information electronically. The risk of interception is too high. He needs to be extracted, physically brought out of Syria to a secure location where he can be debriefed." A Marine colonel leaned forward. "What's the location?" "A city called Al-Shaddadi in northeastern Syria. It's in a contested zone. Government forces, Kurdish fighters, ISIS cells, Russian military advisors. It's a powder keg." Another officer, an Air Force general, spoke up. "Exfiltration by air." "Too risky," Blackwood said. "The airspace is monitored by multiple parties. We'd be spotted immediately. This needs to be a ground operation. Small team, in and out before anyone knows we're there." He looked directly at Sarah. "General Mitchell, this is where you come in. Your experience in the region, your language skills, your history with covert extraction operations. We need you to plan this mission." Sarah felt every eye turn to her. This was exactly the kind of operation she had spent her career preparing for. Dangerous, complex, high stakes. But she was supposed to be done with field work. She was supposed to be in a command position, coordinating operations, not leading them. "Sir," she said carefully. I'm honored, but I'm in a command position now. Shouldn't this be assigned to someone currently in an operational role? General Blackwood smiled slightly. I'm not asking you to lead the mission personally, Sarah. I'm asking you to plan it, to use your expertise to give us the best chance of success. The extraction team will be SEALs from DVGRU, but they need someone who understands the human terrain, the cultural factors, the intelligence picture. That's you. Sarah nodded slowly. What's the timeline? The source says he has a window of opportunity in 2 weeks. After that, his cover will be compromised. He has to move then, or we lose him and the intelligence he's carrying. 2 weeks to plan a complex extraction operation in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Sarah felt her mind already working through the problems, the variables, the dozens of things that could go wrong. I'll need full access to all current intelligence on the region, she said. Human intelligence, signals intelligence, satellite imagery, everything we have. You'll have it within the hour, Blackwood promised. I'll also need to work directly with the SEAL team. They need to understand the plan inside and out. This isn't the kind of operation where you can adjust on the fly. Once you're in, you're committed. Agreed. The team leader is Commander James Peterson. Good officer. He's waiting to meet with you after this briefing. For the next 3 hours, the group discussed logistics, support elements, extraction routes, and contingency plans. Sarah took notes, asked questions, and began forming a mental picture of how this could work. When the meeting finally broke up, she headed to a smaller conference room where Commander Peterson was waiting. He was in his early 40s, lean and weathered, with the calm confidence that came from years of successful operations. General Mitchell, he said, standing as she entered, it's an honor to work with you. Please call me Sarah when we're in planning sessions. And the honor is mutual. I've read your service record. Impressive. They sat down and Sarah pulled out a map of Syria. Let's talk about the reality of what we're facing. This isn't going to be a standard extraction. Al-Shaddadi is complicated. Multiple factions, shifting alliances. The wrong move could trigger an international incident. Peterson nodded. What do you recommend? We need to blend in, Sarah said. Americans in tactical gear will stand out immediately. But the region has Kurdish fighters, Turkish-backed militias, various factions. We need to look like we belong. She traced a route on the map with her finger. I'm thinking we use local vehicles, local clothing. The team needs to look like just another group of fighters moving through the area. Nothing special, nothing worth noticing. That means leaving behind a lot of our standard equipment, Peterson said. No American weapons, no high-tech comm gear. Exactly. You'll be using AK-47s, commercial radios, whatever locals would have. It's not ideal, but it's necessary. Peterson thought about it, then nodded. I trust your judgment, but my men are going to want to bring their own weapons. It's a comfort thing. I understand, Sarah said, but comfort can get them killed. This only works if we're invisible. The moment someone realizes Americans are in the area, everything falls apart. They spent the next 4 hours going over every detail. Sarah shared her knowledge of the region, the tribal dynamics, the key players. She explained how to navigate checkpoints, how to respond if stopped, what story to tell. You'll need someone who speaks Arabic fluently, she said. Someone who can handle conversations with locals without raising suspicion. I have 2 men on my team with language skills, Peterson said. It's not enough. You need someone who sounds local, someone who understands the cultural nuances, the religion, the politics. She paused, then made a decision. I'm coming with you. Peterson looked shocked. General, with respect, that's not necessary. We can handle this. I'm sure you can handle the tactical side, Sarah said. But I speak the dialect. I understand the region. I've worked with sources like this before. You need me on the ground. General Blackwood is expecting you to plan this operation, not execute it. I'll do both, Sarah said firmly. This is too important. One mistake, one cultural misstep, and your source dies, or your team dies, or both. I can't let that happen. Peterson studied her for a long moment. You're serious about this? Completely. Then I need to be honest with you. My men are going to have concerns, not about your abilities, but about having a general on the team. It changes the dynamic. They'll be worried about protecting you instead of focusing on the mission. Sarah smiled. Tell them I've been in more firefights than most of them combined. Tell them I don't need protection. Tell them I'll pull my weight. And if they still have concerns, tell them to talk to Mike Castillo. Peterson's eyebrows went up. You know Castillo. I carried him 3 miles with a bullet in my leg. He carried me the last half-mile after I collapsed. We have an understanding. Peterson laughed, the tension breaking. Okay, you're in, but I'm going to need you to go through a refresher course. Weapons qualifications, medical training, tactical protocols. No offense, but generals don't usually maintain the same skill levels as operators. None taken, Sarah said. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. 0500, be ready for a long day. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks in the most intense training of her life. She worked alongside Peterson's SEAL team, running scenarios, practicing vehicle operations, studying updated intelligence. Her body ached in places she had forgotten existed. Her hands blistered from hours on the firing range. Her mind swam with Arabic phrases, cultural protocols, and contingency plans. But she kept up. The SEALs watched her with initial skepticism that gradually turned to respect. She didn't ask for special treatment. She didn't slow them down. When they ran, she ran. When they trained, she trained. When they reviewed plans at midnight, she was there with coffee and sharp questions. Briggs showed up on the 4th day. He had been approved for transfer to the ISA and was being integrated into the unit. When he learned about the Syria operation, he immediately volunteered. Absolutely not, Sarah told him. You're too new. You don't know the team. You'd be a liability. I've operated in Syria before, Briggs argued. I know the terrain, I know the threats, and I speak Arabic. So do I, Sarah said. With respect, General, you need backup. Someone else who can handle negotiations if something happens to you. Someone who can take over if the primary plan fails. He had a point, but Sarah was reluctant. Bringing him into this operation felt like giving him a chance at redemption, and she didn't want that to be the motivation. This isn't about making up for what happened at the ceremony, she said. This isn't about proving yourself to me. I know, Briggs said. This is about the mission, about bringing our source home safely. I'm good at what I do, General. Let me help. Sarah looked at Peterson, who had been listening to the exchange. Your call, the commander said. But for what it's worth, I've worked with Briggs before. He's solid. Fine, Sarah said. You're in, but you follow orders, no heroics, no improvisation. We stick to the plan. Yes, ma'am. The night before they deployed, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, writing letters. One to her sister, one to General Blackwood, one to each member of her mentorship program. She didn't expect to die, but in her experience, expectations meant nothing in combat zones. In each letter, she wrote about service, about doing the right thing even when it was hard, about standing up for what mattered. She wrote about lessons learned, mistakes made, and wisdom earned through years in the field. When she finished, she sealed the letters and put them in her desk drawer. Then she picked up her phone and made one call. Rebecca, it's Sarah. I need you to do something for me. Of course, General, anything. If something happens to me in the next week, there are letters in my desk. Make sure they get delivered. There was silence on the other end. Then Rebecca's voice, carefully controlled. Nothing's going to happen to you, ma'am. Probably not, but just in case. Yes, ma'am, I'll take care of it. Sarah hung up and looked around her quarters. The small room had become home over the past months. Photos on the walls, books on the shelves, a comfortable chair by the window where she liked to read in the evenings. She wondered if she was making a mistake. She had a command position, responsibilities, people depending on her. Was it selfish to risk all that on one operation? But then she thought about the intelligence source in Syria, a brave man who had risked everything to help America, a man who would die if they didn't get him out. How could she send others to do something she wasn't willing to do herself? Leadership meant being willing to go first, to take the same risks you asked of your soldiers, to never demand something you wouldn't give yourself. That was the lesson she had learned over 28 years of service. That was the lesson she needed to teach the next generation. At 3 in the morning, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from Peterson. "Wheels up at 0500, ready when you are." Sarah typed back, "See you on the flight line." She put on her uniform one more time, checked her gear, and headed out into the darkness. The operation was about to begin, and whatever happened next, she was ready. The helicopter flight from the Turkish border into Syria was the longest 90 minutes of Sarah's life. She sat between Peterson and Briggs in the darkened cargo bay, surrounded by the SEAL team. 8 operators total, counting her and Briggs, a small force for a dangerous mission. They flew low, hugging the terrain, avoiding radar detection. The crew chief gave them a 5-minute warning, and everyone checked their gear one final time. Sarah wore local clothing over light body armor. She carried an AK-47 that had been sanitized to remove any markings that could trace it back to American forces. Her only concession to modern equipment was a small encrypted radio hidden in her clothing. The helicopter touched down in a remote valley 30 miles from Al-Shaddadi. They had 60 seconds to unload before it lifted off again, disappearing into the night sky. Suddenly, they were alone in hostile territory with no immediate backup and no easy way home. Peterson gathered the team in a tight circle. "We hike to the vehicles, 3 miles northwest. Stay alert. Stay quiet. If we make contact, we fade. We do not engage unless absolutely necessary." They moved through the darkness in single file, using night vision to navigate the rocky terrain. Sarah was third in line, with Briggs behind her. Her legs remembered this kind of movement, even after months behind a desk. The weight of the pack, the rhythm of the pace, the constant alertness to every sound and shadow. The vehicles were waiting where intelligence said they would be. 2 old Toyota trucks, beaten and dusty, indistinguishable from thousands of others in the region. Their Kurdish contact was there too, a thin man in his 50s named Rashid who greeted them in Arabic. Sarah stepped forward, responding in the same language. They spoke for a few minutes, establishing trust, confirming details of the operation. Rashid's eyes widened slightly when he realized she spoke his dialect perfectly, with the proper accent and idioms. "You have been to this region before," he said in Arabic. It wasn't a question. "Many times," Sarah replied. "Your country is beautiful even in times of war." Rashid nodded, seeming satisfied. "The man you seek is waiting in Al-Shaddadi, but the city is dangerous now. ISIS is searching for infiltrators. They suspect someone is passing information. Can you get us to him?" "Yes, I have arranged everything, but we must move quickly, before dawn." They loaded into the trucks and began the drive toward Al-Shaddadi. Sarah rode in the lead vehicle with Peterson and Rashid. The others followed in the second truck. As they drove, Sarah watched the landscape pass by in the pre-dawn darkness. Syria had once been so beautiful. Ancient cities, vibrant culture, proud people. War had scarred it terribly. They passed through 2 checkpoints without incident. Rashid did the talking, explaining they were moving supplies for one of the local militias. The guards, bored and underpaid, waved them through after cursory inspections. But the third checkpoint was different. More guards, more suspicious. One of them, a young man with hard eyes, walked around the truck slowly, looking at each passenger carefully. When his eyes landed on Sarah, they narrowed. He said something in Arabic to his commander. Sarah's blood ran cold. He had noticed something. Maybe her hands, which were paler than a local woman's would be. Maybe her posture. Maybe just instinct. The commander approached the truck. "You," he said to Sarah in Arabic, "get out." Sarah climbed down slowly, keeping her hands visible, keeping her movements non-threatening. Behind her, she could feel Peterson tensing. The SEALs in the second truck would be preparing for action, but any shooting here would doom the mission and probably kill them all. The commander circled her, studying her face in the dim light. "Where are you from?" he asked. Sarah answered in flawless Arabic, giving the name of a village north of Al-Shaddadi. She explained she was traveling with her cousin's militia group, helping to transport medical supplies. Her voice was calm, her story rehearsed. But the commander wasn't convinced. "You don't look like a Syrian woman." "My mother was Turkish," Sarah said, continuing the cover story they had prepared. "I inherited her coloring." The commander reached out and grabbed her wrist, pulling her hand up to examine it. "These are not the hands of someone who works in the fields." Sarah's mind raced. The truth was, he was right. Her hands were scarred, but they were also well cared for. Not the hands of a rural Syrian woman. She had one chance to sell this lie or everything would fall apart. "I was a teacher," she said, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "In Raqqa, before ISIS came, before they destroyed everything. Now I do what I must to survive, we all do." She met his eyes directly, and in that moment she let him see real pain, real loss. Not her own story, but the story of thousands of Syrian women who had lost everything to war. She had met enough of them over the years to know their grief, their resilience, their quiet strength. The commander's expression softened slightly. He released her wrist. "Papers." Sarah produced the forged identification documents that Rashid had provided. The commander examined them carefully, comparing the photo to her face. The seconds stretched like hours. Finally, he handed them back. "Go, quickly, and be careful in Al-Shaddadi. It is not safe these days." "Nowhere is safe these days," Sarah replied, a line that any Syrian would understand. She climbed back into the truck. Rashid started the engine and they drove away, leaving the checkpoint behind. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Sarah's heart was pounding, but she kept her face calm. "That was close," Peterson said quietly. "Too close," Sarah agreed. "We need to move faster. If they start asking questions or checking those documents more carefully, they'll figure out they're fake." They reached Al-Shaddadi as dawn was breaking. The city was waking up, but it was a tense, nervous awakening. Armed groups patrolled the streets. Buildings showed the scars of recent fighting. People moved quickly, heads down, avoiding attention. Rashid led them to a house on the edge of the city. They parked the trucks in a covered courtyard and went inside. The house belonged to one of Rashid's relatives, a woman named Amira who offered them tea and bread without asking questions. In this part of the world, hospitality was sacred, even in dangerous times. "Your source will come here after sunset," Rashid explained. "He cannot move during the day, too many eyes." "That gives us 12 hours to wait," Peterson said, "and 12 hours for someone to notice we're here." "We'll post security," Sarah said. "Rotating shifts, 2 people watching at all times, everyone else rests. We'll need our energy tonight." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah took the first watch with Briggs, positioning themselves where they could see the street without being easily spotted. The city moved around them in its daily rhythms, but there was an underlying tension. Military vehicles passed by every hour. Armed men moved in groups, checking buildings, questioning people on the street. "This place feels like it could explode any second," Briggs said quietly. "It could," Sarah agreed. "That's why we need to be gone by midnight, in and out, no delays." "General, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you really come on this mission? I know what you told Commander Peterson, but I think there's more to it." Sarah was silent for a moment, watching the street. "Because I was tired of sending other people to do the dangerous work while I sat safely behind a desk. Because this is what I'm good at. And because our source deserves the best chance of survival, and I can provide that." "But you're a general now. You have bigger responsibilities." "A general's responsibility is to her soldiers," Sarah said. "All of them, including the ones who risk their lives to provide intelligence. This man in Al-Shaddadi, he trusted us. He put his life on the line for America. I'm here to make sure we honor that trust." Briggs nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said at the ceremony, about service, about what it really means. I think I'm finally starting to understand." "Good, because understanding that is more important than any skill or qualification." As the sun set, tension increased. Rashid confirmed that the source was on his way. The team prepared for extraction, checking weapons, reviewing the escape route, making sure everyone knew their role. At 9:30, there was a knock at the door. 3 quick raps, then 2 slow ones. The signal. Rashid opened the door and a man slipped inside quickly, looking behind him to make sure he hadn't been followed. The source was younger than Sarah expected, maybe 35, with an engineer's soft hands and a scholar's careful eyes. He was terrified but trying to hide it. Sarah greeted him in Arabic, introducing herself only as the American officer who will take you to safety. They didn't use names on operations like this. The less everyone knew, the safer everyone was. "You have information for us?" Sarah asked. The source nodded, pulling a small USB drive from his pocket. "Everything is on here: attack plans, target lists, names of operatives in Europe, financial networks. Everything I could gather without raising suspicion." "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked. She always asked that question. The answer told her a lot about whether someone could be trusted. The source's eyes filled with tears. "ISIS killed my family, my wife, my daughter. They said my wife was impure because she taught at a school. They said my daughter was too westernized because she wanted to be a doctor. They murdered them in the street as an example." His voice broke. "I swore on their graves that I would destroy the people who did this, that I would stop them from hurting anyone else. The information on that drive will save lives. It will prevent attacks. It will punish the guilty. That is all I care about now." Sarah took the USB drive, securing it in a hidden pocket. "We're going to get you out, take you somewhere safe. You can start a new life." "I don't want a new life," the source said bitterly. "I want the one I had, but since I can't have that, I will settle for vengeance." Peterson checked his watch. "We need to move. The extraction window closes in 3 hours." They prepared to leave, but as they reached the door, there was a sudden burst of gunfire from the street. Shouting, the sound of vehicles approaching fast. Through the window, Sarah saw armed men in ISIS uniforms pouring into the neighborhood. "They're doing a sweep," Rashid said, his face pale. "We're trapped." Peterson looked at Sarah. "Orders." Sarah's mind went into overdrive, calculating options, assessing threats, looking for any possible solution. They were 8 operators, 1 local guide, and 1 terrified source, surrounded by what sounded like dozens of enemy fighters. "We stay quiet," she said. "We hide. They're looking for someone, but they don't know we're here specifically. If we're lucky, they'll pass by." "And if we're not lucky?" Briggs asked. "Then we fight our way out, and hope the extraction helicopter can get here before we're overrun." They took positions throughout the house, weapons ready, waiting in silence. The sounds outside grew louder, doors being kicked in, people being dragged out for questioning, the systematic search of a determined enemy. Then the worst sound possible, footsteps approaching their door, a fist pounding on the wood, a voice shouting in Arabic for everyone inside to come out immediately. Sarah looked at her team. She saw their trust in her, their willingness to follow whatever decision she made. She thought about their families, their futures, their right to survive this night. She made a decision. "Rashid, Amira, go answer the door. Everyone else stays hidden unless shooting starts. If it comes to that, we make every shot count." Rashid and Amira went to the door, opening it with proper fear on their faces. An ISIS fighter pushed inside, looking around suspiciously. 2 more followed him, their weapons raised. They questioned Rashid in rapid Arabic, asking about strangers, about unusual activity, about anything suspicious. Rashid played his part perfectly, a frightened man eager to cooperate, insisting he knew nothing, saw nothing. But then one of the fighters walked toward the back room where Sarah was hidden. She controlled her breathing, her finger on the trigger, ready to act. The fighter reached for the door handle. And then a massive explosion rocked the neighborhood. The windows shattered. The fighters spun toward the sound, yelling into their radios. There was chaos in the street, more explosions, gunfire from multiple directions. "The Kurds," Rashid said, understanding immediately. "They're attacking, a diversion." The ISIS fighters ran out of the house, racing toward the battle. Sarah and her team emerged from hiding, weapons ready. "That's our chance," Peterson said. "We move now while they're distracted." They rushed to the trucks, piling in quickly. The Source was shaking but moving. As they drove toward the edge of the city, the battle raged behind them. Buildings burned. Tracer rounds lit up the sky. It was chaos, and chaos was exactly what they needed. They made it through the city past checkpoints that were now abandoned as fighters rushed to defend against the Kurdish attack. They drove into the darkness beyond the city limits, their headlights off, navigating by memory and night vision. 5 miles out, they stopped and made the radio call. "Eagle Nest, this is rescue team. Package secure. Request immediate extraction." The response came back immediately. "Rescue team, Eagle Nest. Birds inbound. ETA 20 minutes. They waited in tense silence, scanning for pursuit. The Source sat in the truck, clutching the USB drive as if it were the most precious thing in the world. To him, it was. It represented his vengeance, his purpose, his reason for continuing to live. Sarah watched him, understanding that look. She had seen it before in people who had lost everything but refused to quit. There was a kind of terrible strength that came from having nothing left to lose. The helicopters came in low and fast, landing in a cloud of dust. The team loaded quickly, and within seconds they were lifting off, leaving Syria behind. As they climbed into the night sky, Sarah looked back at the burning city below. She thought about all the people still trapped down there, the innocent civilians caught in an endless war, the children who didn't understand why their world was full of violence. She couldn't save them all, but she had saved one man tonight, one man who would help prevent future attacks, one man who would get his revenge and maybe find some measure of peace. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Back at the Turkish base, they were met by intelligence officers eager to debrief the Source. The USB drive was taken to a secure facility for analysis. Early reports suggested it contained more valuable intelligence than they had hoped for. Names, locations, financial networks. The kind of information that could disrupt ISIS operations for months, maybe years. General Blackwood was there waiting. "Well done, Sarah, all of you. This is exactly the kind of operation we needed." "The Kurds saved us," Sarah said. "Their attack provided the distraction we needed. We owe them." "I know, and we'll make sure they're compensated, but you made the plan work. You got everyone out safely. That's what matters." The team dispersed to clean up and rest. Briggs approached Sarah before leaving. "Thank you for bringing me on this mission, and thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. Not just on this operation, but since the ceremony. You've changed how I see everything." "You did good work tonight, Lieutenant. Keep doing good work and you'll go far." After everyone left, Sarah sat alone in the debriefing room, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the bone-deep tiredness that came after operations like this. But there was also satisfaction. They had accomplished the mission. Everyone came home. The intelligence would save lives. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "General, 4 people came to see you today. They left a letter. It's on your desk. They said it's important." Sarah frowned. She wouldn't be back at Fort Bragg for 2 more days. Whatever it was would have to wait. But as it turned out, it couldn't wait. General Blackwood approached her the next morning. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something. It's good news, but it's also complicated." They went to a secure office. Blackwood handed her a letter. "This arrived yesterday. It's signed by 4 generals, very specific generals." Sarah opened the letter and began reading. It was from Generals Walsh, Chen, Hayes, and Blackwood himself. But it wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to the Secretary of the Army. The letter nominated her for promotion to Major General. It detailed her career, her accomplishments, her leadership. But more than that, it talked about her character, her integrity, her commitment to service over glory, her ability to inspire the next generation of officers. "We can't promote someone who just went on a field operation," Sarah said, looking up. "It sends the wrong message. Generals shouldn't be going into hostile territory." Blackwood smiled. Which is why we dated the letter 3 months ago before you came to Syria. We knew you'd find a way to get into the field again. You can't help yourself. But the promotion is real. The army needs you at a higher level, especially after last night. Sarah read the letter again, seeing the words but struggling to process them. Major General, 2 stars, a position of significant influence and responsibility. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Blackwood replied. Say you'll accept. Say you'll continue to serve and lead and teach young officers what it means to be a soldier. Sarah thought about the long road that had brought her here. The struggles, the battles, the moments of doubt, the ceremony where Briggs had dismissed her and 4 generals had stood up to defend her. She thought about the young officers in her mentorship program, the women who needed role models, the men who needed to learn what real leadership looked like. She thought about Briggs, who had gone from arrogant SEAL to humble student in a matter of months. She thought about the source in Syria, who had risked everything for justice, about the soldiers she had saved over the years, about the ones she couldn't save, whose names she carried in her heart. Yes, she said finally, I accept. 3 weeks later, there was another ceremony, much smaller than the memorial service where everything had changed, just close colleagues and friends. General Blackwood pinned the 2nd star on Sarah's shoulder himself. Congratulations, Major General Mitchell, he said. The Army is lucky to have you. In the audience, Briggs stood at attention, pride evident on his face. Next to him were several members of Peterson's SEAL team who had gotten permission to attend. In the front row were the 4 generals who had changed her life. And scattered throughout the room were the young officers from her mentorship program, watching their mentor rise higher, knowing it was possible for them too. After the ceremony, as people congratulated her and shook her hand, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of retirement or rest, but the peace of knowing she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. A young captain approached her nervously. General Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you for the mentorship program, for showing us that we belong, that our service matters. You do belong, Sarah said, and your service absolutely matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Even if they disrespect us, even if they dismiss us. Sarah smiled, thinking about that moment at the memorial service, the moment that changed everything. Especially then, because when someone underestimates you, they've already lost. They just don't know it yet. She looked around the room at the faces watching her. Young and old, male and female, different branches, different backgrounds, all united by their commitment to serve something bigger than themselves. The uniform doesn't care about your gender or your background or what anyone thinks you should be, Sarah continued. The uniform cares about one thing. Can you do the job? Can you lead? Can you serve? If the answer is yes, then you belong, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong. The young captain saluted and walked away, standing a little straighter. Sarah watched her go, hoping she had helped in some small way. General Blackwood approached. You've done good work, Sarah, not just last night in Syria, but here, building the next generation. That's as important as any mission. It's the most important mission, Sarah said. Because they're our future. Everything we've built, everything we've accomplished, it only matters if we pass it on to people who will carry it forward. Spoken like a true leader. As the reception wound down, Sarah found herself standing with the 4 generals who had started all of this. They talked quietly, sharing memories, telling stories that would never be declassified, laughing at jokes only soldiers would understand. I have a question, Sarah said. That day at the memorial service, did you plan what happened, the speeches, the promotion? The 4 generals exchanged glances. Finally, General Hayes smiled. Let's just say we saw an opportunity to correct an injustice and to remind everyone what service really looks like. Young Briggs needed a lesson, General Chen added, and you needed recognition you would never have asked for yourself.